Hey, there's an easier way to get color. Get a Game Gear, the full color portable with over 150 games, like the new Echo, Mortal 2, and Sonic Triple Trouble.
Sega!
The story of the Game Gear starts in 1979. This is when Milton Bradley released the first handheld system with interchangeable games, called the Microvision. This handheld instituted a new technology, the LCD dot matrix screen. Before this, only simple LCD screens such as calculators and watches were made. However, the technology just was not perfected yet, and the Microvision was plagued with screen rot issues, leading to its quick demise. Though handheld games were still popular, games like Mattel's electronic sports games, Coleco's tabletops, and Nintendo's Game & Watches were selling really well. By the mid-1980s, the video game market went through the Great Crash, and Nintendo, a little-known company besides in Japan, took off with the release of the NES. Sega had been competing with Nintendo in the Japanese game market, with consoles like the SG-1000 and the Mark II. However, they never really gained a foothold in the Japanese marketplace against the Famicom. Then in 1985, Sega released the Sega Mark III in Japan, and then in 1986, they released a redesigned Mark III called the Master System to compete with Nintendo's NES in North America. By 1987, Nintendo and Sega were in a full console war. Nintendo was still king of the consoles, even in North America, but to stay on top, they had to come up with another system. With the success of the Game & Watches, Nintendo saw a great opportunity in the handheld market. When they started the design of the Game Boy, Nintendo went all the way back to the Microvision days and created a handheld with interchangeable games and a modernized dot matrix screen. In 1989, Nintendo released the Game Boy, and it was a phenomenon. Sales of the system skyrocketed. Meanwhile, Sega released their new 16-bit home console, the Mega Drive, or better known as the Genesis here in North America. Sales of the system were slow in Japan, but in North America and Europe, they took off. Sega was finally outselling Nintendo's NES. Now they had their sights on the handheld market that Nintendo had took by storm. In mid-1989, Project Mercury was started. This was the code name given to Sega's handheld prototype. The project was spearheaded by Sega lead engineer Hideki Sato. He wanted a portable game system that had a color backlit screen. And by this time, the technology that was used in the Sega Master System could be shrunk down small enough to power a new handheld that would keep R&D costs down to a minimum. But Sato didn't want it to be just a new handheld portable Master System, so they got to work updating the old VDP or video display processor. But by the time they were done, they developed a much better VDP that provided 4,096 colors, which was 64 times the amount of colors that the Sega Master System produced with only 64 colors. Also during this time, a new competitor entered the handheld market, Atari, with their Lynx handheld. And unlike the Game Boy, the Lynx had a color backlit screen. Now Sega had two competitors, Nintendo and Atari. Atari released the Lynx in November of 1989. And to make matters worse, Sega heard that another competitor was developing their color backlit handheld, NEC, with the PC Engine GT and Turbo Express handhelds. Development of the new Mercury project was completed in early 1990, and the system was renamed Game Gear. This was a name chosen by Michael Katz, Sega of America's CEO. The Game Gear was released in Japan on October 6, 1990. It was then debuted at the 1991 Winter CES show with positive reviews. Folks liked the color backlit screen and the games that were shown. Initial sales of the system were good. More than 40,000 units sold in the first 2 days in Japan, and they sold more than 90,000 units in the first 2 months, with over 600,000 units on backorder. The Game Gear then released in North America and in Europe in April of 1991 and in Australia in 1992. Sales in North America and Europe started good as well, selling over 100,000 units in the first few months. However, things were not as good as they seemed. With the system taking 6 AA batteries and battery life only being between 4 to 6 hours, where the Game Boy got well over 20 hours of battery life off the 4 AA batteries. Complaints started to come in. Sega tried a few different things to help. They released a rechargeable NiCad battery pack that clipped onto your belt and plugged into the Game Gear, giving it between 8 to 12 hours of gameplay, but it still was well behind what the Game Boy battery life was. Sega also released a battery that attached to the back of the Game Gear, but people complained that it made the console too heavy and too thick to play comfortably. The last thing that Sega did to try to conserve on power consumption, they integrated most of the chips into one. The CPU, VDP, and SCA chips were all combined into one ASIC chip, but this did little to conserve on power. Then the consumers started to complain about the lack of third-party games. Sega did have some third parties making games for them, but just like on the home consoles, Nintendo had contracts with most third parties, and their games never made it to Sega systems. By 1995, sales of the Game Gear had slumped horribly. Sega knew that they had lost to the Game Boy and released the Sega Nomad, a portable Sega Genesis. They did this to try to get a stronger hold on the handheld market and to keep the aging Genesis alive for a bit longer. But by 1997, the writing was on the wall. Sega discontinued the Game Gear. By the time it was canceled, Sega had refocused their efforts on the home console market and the upcoming Dreamcast. Through its lifespan, the Game Gear had a few cool accessories. They released a TV tuner for it so you could watch your favorite TV shows on the go. They also released the Game Link, a cable that linked 2 Game Gears together so you could play 2-player games together. Pretty cool. Then there was also the FM tuner released for the system. Sega also released the Master System adapter that allowed you to play Sega Master System games on the Game Gear. The Sega Game Gear had a 7-year lifespan from 1990 till 1997. During that time, they sold over 10 million units worldwide and had over 350 games available for the system, being Sega's first and best-selling handheld.
Some people are content to be entertained by simple one-color electronics. Somehow these people have just never heard of Game Gear, the multicolor portable from Sega with tons of new titles. Yeah, some people are like that. But then some people like to eat pickled pork lips. System engaged, sold separately.
Oh, hey, you guys are still here. Well, if you like the content, don't forget to hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell. That way you get notifications every time I drop new content like this. Also, if you want to help support the channel, go ahead and hit that super thanks heart down below and go ahead and leave a comment. Any support we get goes directly back into the channel for videos just like the one that you're watching today. Alright guys, let's go ahead and check out some of the cool games that are available on the Sega Game Gear.
If you were colorblind and had an IQ less than 12, then you wouldn't care which portable you had. Of course, you wouldn't care if you drank from the toilet either.